And thanks, everybody, for listening. I am your host, John Rush. Rush to Reason, and we're going to get right to it. I've got Brian Watson, who's on the phone. Brian, thank you for calling in today and for joining me. Brian is you're basically the head of Northstar Commercial Partners. Am I right in saying that, Brian?
That's correct, and thank you for having me on the show today.
No, thank you. Give us a little more of your background, not a ton, because we'll work into some of that as we go through the show, but give us a little bit of your background. Then one question I have for you after you do that is, what is our business climate in Colorado?
Well, as you said, I'm the founder and owner of Northstar Commercial Partners and basically a job creator. We buy vacant buildings and put them back into productivity to create jobs and opportunity for the people of Colorado.
Awesome. And that's by the way, thank you. We need more people doing that. And in doing so, we will help our economy here in Colorado. And that's a lot of what I want to talk about today. I know you have multiple hats you wear. You do a lot of things for, not-for-profit, nonprofits, et cetera. You help get things started that a lot of other people would not be able to do. And, I'll let you toot your own horn as we go through the segments today. But, what is our climate? What is our business climate like in Colorado right now?
Well, we've been very fortunate in, a lot of the stats we're leading the country in terms of job creation and opportunity. And partly that's, the great state, the beautiful state we live in, and all the natural resources we have is a big driver in that. And our people. We've got a lot of very talented people willing to roll up their shirt sleeves and make it happen. That being said, my concern right now is we're in a climate where, we could definitely use some more leadership from government, a lot of more proactive leadership trying to make a difference, and instead of getting in the way of business and trying to hold, energy resources and a host of other things, down at the end of the day.
And you're right. And I couldn't agree with you more when you say that. And I want to talk about, as we get into a couple of segments, where we're at on the race to the governor, if you would. And we've got some other key races, but that one being, top of mind for a lot of folks. But, let's talk just for a moment and kind of delve into some of the things that we could as a state do. And I know you're an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. I don't have quite the company that you have size-wise, but I employ quite a few people and do my best, like you, to help make sure that we're growing the economy and doing what we need to do, paying, my fair share of taxes, and we're, jumping through all the regulatory hoops, et cetera. But let's delve into, just some of the things that somebody with leadership could come along and do, because I think my listeners, I'm a solution-driven show. I want to give out some ideas that, okay, folks, these are the things you need to look for in a candidate, in a city councilman, in a mayor, in your county commissioners. What are things we need to be doing in Colorado to get our economy, so that we're number one in the nation? That should be our goal. I would think any politician would want to make that their goal. How do we do that, Brian?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, as a fellow entrepreneur, and whether you're just employing yourself or one person or 100 people or anything in between, it's hard being an entrepreneur. And we've got to try to come along those small businesses. They're the real driver in our communities, and to come alongside them and help them. I was at Bob Beaupre's business conference yesterday, and he had a statement that I absolutely loved. He said, we're going to review all the laws and the programs in the state, and if they're anti-freedom, anti-job, or anti-economic opportunity, we're going to be asking the question, why are we doing it? And I think, going through and having a whole-scale review of what the government is in the business of doing, and should it even be in that business. Unfortunately, with our current leadership, it's this idea that the government is the solution for everything. And I really believe, and as does Bob and host of other people in our state, that the people are the answer. And the more that you can free them up and remove wasteful, regulations on them. The other day in the debate, over 2,000 new laws have been placed on the people of Colorado. That's unacceptable.
It is. That's a ton. In fact, in that debate, and I talked about this on Friday, but we'll cover it again. Beaupre was talking about how, Hickenlooper added 2,000. Supposedly there was 200 that were done away with, which Hickenlooper wants to tout, but really a lot of those were probably just, dead things that need cleaned up anyways. And so, even if you factor in the 200, that's an 1,800 net gain. But I guess the way I look at it, Brian, is there was a 2,000 net gain in new regulation in laws, if you really want to look at it accurately, because the 200 should have been gone in the first place. So the reality is there's 2,000 new regulations in Colorado we all have to jump through.
And I agree. And, the fact of the matter is you line up 3 people in a room, entrepreneurs or anyone in between, and, most of us don't even know what all the laws are. There's so many.
That's
and they
right.
build on top of each other one after another. And, when I started my company 15 years ago, I said to a CPA and to an attorney and a business consultant, I said, assume I know absolutely nothing, because the way the laws are and how, you have to go through that minefield, I don't want to make a mistake. And it's really a shame that you have to conduct yourself that way.
It is, and we had a similar thing happen this morning. I do some property maintenance and things like that, so I've got multiple different vehicles and people out running around, et cetera. So we had one of my crews today pulled over by Denver PD randomly. By the way, they'd pulled over one car for who knows what, and then we just happened to be driving by next, and this particular officer, I guess, just felt inclined to yank us over for no apparent reason. They weren't speeding, doing anything wrong, and just do what she calls a level 1 inspection of the rig. And in turn, the emergency brake for the trailer, the battery that drives that, happened to be low, and it wouldn't engage the brakes. So the vehicle gets red flagged. We can't go anywhere. So I now have a crew of 4 people down while I drive all the way from Lafayette to downtown Denver. 4 people sitting there. They're on the clock. I've also now got fuel and a whole nother rig going down to retrieve that rig. It turned out it was just the battery was low. We charge it up. We get them going. No big deal. But my point is, I now have to send my employee to traffic court. There'll be a fine, I'm sure. I lost wages with all of that went on this morning. That in and of itself, and I realize, Brian, there's safety and all those things. I get that. But in this particular instant, it's nothing more than a revenue generator.
Yeah. And the question is, what are these laws for? Are they truly to protect the people and the citizens, or are they revenue generators,
Yep.
At the end of the day? And I think that, unfortunately, government has grown so much that, they're trying to defend their existence on all levels. And part of that is creating a quote-unquote revenue, when I would submit you're taking out of, a person's pocket who's trying to go out and create opportunity and create jobs and putting it into the coffers of government, which always isn't the most efficient.
Yeah, and again, folks, I'm not trying to whine. I'm just giving you an example of what happens in small business where there's just multiple things that we have to jump through. And I haven't even got into what happens with, liability insurance and workman's comp and all of the other things that you battle in making sure that things are right, and all the safety programs we have to put in and the OSHA regulations you have to meet. And Brian, we could go on and on for the next several hours, not just the next few minutes. We could go on for several hours talking about this. When we come back, I'm going to take a quick break. We come back. I do want to delve into these candidates, and I want to get into this. We've got an important election coming up. We've got to take back some reins, if we would. We've got to rein some of what we've been talking about back in. We need to know how to do that, who to vote for. We'll talk about that as soon as we come back. So, Brian, hang with us. We'll be back right after this. John Rush, your host, KLZ 560. All right, John Rush, Rush to Reason, KLZ 560. Brian Watson is with me, and again, he's the owner, the leader, the man at the top, Northstar Commercial Partners. Brian, thanks for taking time out of your day. And before we get into, who we should vote for, one thing that I've always thought, and I'll get your opinion on this and see what you think, but I would think that if a state really wants to move forward economically, that they go and they interview and or, use the resources of folks like yourself and myself to garner some of that experience out in the workforce. Say, okay, guys, how do we put more people to work? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And, I think, unfortunately, that there are those in government who believe, this is about government and about, you have to be experienced in government. Well, the government should be, of and by and for the people. And I think whenever you look at all of the, resources that are available, people like you and myself and others who are on the front lines, regardless of their size of business, everybody has a different view, a different sphere of influence and experience. And to bring them to the table and encourage them to participate and come up with good creative ideas, that's really what moves an economy forward. Yeah,
and to your point, at least from what I can see, now again, perception is 90% of reality. So on my front, in my business, et cetera, I don't see a lot of that going on. Now you can correct me if I'm wrong, but currently, is that going on? I guess is the question in what we have right now in our political climate today in Colorado.
Well, unfortunately, I haven't seen a lot of it myself. I think it does go on if, in fact, you were, maybe some big campaign contributor, or if you're on a certain political party or whatever it might be. But, regardless of one's political party, regardless of how big of a check they write, we should be reaching out to those different people in those different spheres and encouraging them and letting them have a voice at the table and work together and truly, work across those party lines as well. It's just so vitally important.
And you couldn't have said it better. And I've got to believe, and again, you're much more in this realm than I am, but I've got to believe the states that are on the forefront, economically speaking, Texas and others, I've got to believe those are some of the things they're doing. And if that's the case, do you know that, in fact, that they are doing that?
Well, I think you're right. You look at the different states that border Colorado alone, and a lot of them have better, economic, output and details than we do. And part of that is that a lot of those states, are fully embracing the energy industry. Mm-hmm. You look at Weld County, number one county in the country here in Colorado. And, I would say that the success in Weld County is in spite of our current government and current government regulation. The people of Weld County are out there making it happen. I was reading an article the other day. We talk about good quality jobs, and people involved in the oil and gas industry, over 65% of them that are out in the field don't have a college education. Right. And that those people have an average income in the industry of $108,000. Now, not everybody makes $108,000, but I'll tell you what, those are great paying jobs.
Yeah, it is.
Every 5,000 jobs that are created, 20,000 additional jobs are created. That's what we need to embrace more of.
Yeah, no, you're right. And somehow Weld County's figured out a way to do that in spite, like you say, in spite of what we have going on in our state. And so let's talk about the candidates. Let's shift gears here for a moment. I mean, we've been talking about the climate and, how we fix some of these things, et cetera. But, you're right in the midst of this. And that's partly why you're on air with us today. You're in the midst of this. You know these candidates as well as anybody. I listened to a show this morning on Wake Up with Randy Corcoran, and he had a guest on. In fact, it's well known. Mark Zarlingo was on, and they were talking about Cory Gardner and some others, and basically that there are times where you just vote against the R ticket to prove a point, to basically prove that you don't like what's gone on with that particular candidate, so you're going to vote R. In this particular case, a vote for Cory Gardner, in my view, is a vote for Mark Udall, which is totally anti-business, morally he doesn't even align with what I believe in. He definitely doesn't align economically with where I'm at. He doesn't align with it in what you just talked about in the gas and oil and our energy sides of the fence. And so a vote against Gardner, no matter what you do, if you're not voting for him, you're voting for Udall, whether you check that box or not.
I agree, and I think that would be very, very sad, and I think you're, cutting your nose off to spite your face at the end of the day on something like that. I personally know Cory and Bob, and I'll tell you what, these are good, quality individuals that are very well-meaning and want to serve our state, and that already have served our state. I can tell you, if you took Obama and you took Hickenlooper and Bennett and Udall and you put them all together, they're all kind of cut from the same piece of cloth. Yep. They believe in a certain role of government in society and that they know best and government knows best. And look at your company, for instance. Who would you want to hire? Would you want to hire somebody like Cory, who's just happy and going to go make it happen, or somebody like Bob, who's really a quality individual, or somebody like those other people that I just mentioned to you that I personally you wouldn't even want to work for you.
You're right.
And they are working for us and representing us, and so we need to elect the right people.
Man, that's a great point. In fact, I've never really heard it said that way. I mean, I always say on my show that we have the type of government which everybody tends to forget. We're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic, and those folks work for me. And, I have a difference of opinion on, I respect the office. I don't always respect the person. And I'm very much that way, even up to the presidency. I love the office of the presidency. I don't care for the person today that's running the country. That doesn't mean I'm going to come on here and bash him every day. I'm going to do everything I can possible to make sure he doesn't win or that side doesn't win the next time around. And, we talk a lot on the show, and Brian, I want to get your opinion on this. There's a lot of folks out there that I think, especially from our side of the fence, the liberty movement side of the fence, that are looking for that quote-unquote perfect candidate. And no matter what, I'm not perfect, you're not perfect, Cory's not perfect, Bob's not perfect. How do we message and how do we get around some of those quote-unquote faults where somebody may not agree with a particular ideal that maybe, a Cory, for example, since that was the topic earlier today, they might not agree with what Cory did in the past. How do we get around that and still get them to look at the big picture of who they need to vote for?
Well, as you said, I'm a liberty-minded individual as well, and I think we need to be pushing back on government and getting it, right-sizing it. And, I liken it to a football game. I would assume that most of us in Colorado are Broncos fans. At least I hope that we are.
I hope we are.
And I know I am. And I look at it like a football game, and that, at the end of the day, the goal is to move the ball down the field. And with some candidates, you may get a few inches or a few yards, and other candidates in your mind may be the touchdown. But at the end of the day, we've got to move the ball down the field. And I think people like Corey and Bob are a whole lot better than people like Udall and Hickenlooper who have a totally different view of the role of government in society. So I would hope that people would get on the team, and I would hope that we would call a good play and move the ball down the field and get as much yardage as we can.
Yeah, and let's talk about that for just a moment. Again, I talk about this a lot on my show, but I want to reemphasize this. There is a difference in not just philosophy, but in life in general, what their core values are and what they believe in. You know, and I'm going to use Udall and Mark. I mean, there's a lot to talk about with the governor side of the fence, which we can get into in a little bit. But right now, we'll just talk about Mark and Corey. And the reality is there is two opposing differences in how they just view life in general, and that affects everything they do, especially when they go back to Washington and represent us, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, literally, it is a battle of ideas, and each of them have a different view of the role of government. And, you know, for me, what I look at is that whatever side of, whether you're unaffiliated, you know, libertarian, Republican, Democrat, whatever you are, the fact of the matter is there's a fundamental shift of the role of government in American society going on today. And the question is, do you want government to be more socialistic and taking care of all the ills and the pains for the people and growing out of control, or do you want a government as our founding fathers envisioned, which was by and of and for the people, and that was lean and servicing only those basic needs that it's supposed to? That is a fundamental shift that addresses every single decision that they do, and it concerns me.
You know, you're right. And so I'll throw this question out before we take a break, and you can answer this when we come back. And by the way, do you have time for another segment?
I've got whatever you need me for.
Okay, well, that's perfect. I can use you as long as you want to stay, and we'll just keep talking. This is awesome. I'm going to throw this question out to you. In fact, I heard the last candidate that Ken Clark was interviewing that's over in the Thornton area, and this question was posed. And I'm going to ask you the same question. If we go out and we polled, you know, a group of people, there are going to be some in that group that say, you know what, I'm fine with government running everything. In fact, I like that check that I get on a daily basis. In fact, that came up in the debate in last Thursday night's debate, where Bob at one point in time said he thinks there's a certain amount of people that like getting the government cheese. The question I'm going to throw to you, we'll talk about when we come back, is how do we counter that? In other words, how do we continue to move the direction we need to go, and yet even fight some of those individually that think it's okay to be on the government dole? Let's talk about that when we come back. Brian, hang with us. We'll be back right after this. Rush to Reason. John Rush, your host, KLZ 560. John Rush, your host, KLZ 560. Rush to Reason is the program. Every day, 2 p.m., join us. We talk about a lot of really great stuff that help you know what you need to do in your life to make things better, not only for yourself personally, but as a country also. Brian Watson is with us, head of Northstar Commercial Partners. In just a moment, or for just a second, Brian, let's take a little commercial break for yourself. You do more than what you said in the bio. Tell the folks a little bit more, I should say, in our intro. You do more than what we talked about in the intro. Give the folks a few more things that you guys do.
You bet. That's kind of you. We're all about trying to help the people of Colorado, and so we founded a nonprofit called the Opportunity Coalition. You can learn more at opportunitycoalition.com. We bring in a monthly speaker, someone who's, of influence, who shares their golden nuggets of wisdom. This coming Thursday, we have CU President Bruce Benson coming in. We have Jake Jabs coming in and a host of others. I also do a podcast where I interview some people, and you can look at it at iTunes. But, just trying to connect people, promote free enterprise, and build bridges of understanding and connection among Colorado citizens. We're also about ready to launch a new fund to go buy vacant buildings, commercial buildings, for charter schools to help promote choice in education throughout Colorado, because to me it's one of our civil rights issues of our day to get good quality education for all citizens in our state. So
and actually, I want to get into that in a moment. So hang on to that education thought, because that's a big deal. That's a lot of what's being talked about even in this upcoming election. But let's talk for a moment about the side of the fence that maybe, they're okay taking that government cheese. They don't have a problem with that. They enjoy having those handouts. In fact, that was one of the things that, was mentioned in the forum last Thursday night with Bob. And, Bob's answer was, listen, guys, the reality is that, human nature is, if you'll give me something, I'll take it. So how do we combat that side of it, Brian?
Well, I agree with you, to a point. At the same time, I believe that each person wants an opportunity. And, opportunity means different things to different people. But I think we need to communicate our message in a more positive, engaging way. And, throughout time, the more that people depend on government to give them everything that they want, the more control that government will exert upon them.
Agree.
And so, I really believe we should be focusing on talking about how true freedom and opportunity and liberty and being, respectful to the human dignity that these people to create that opportunity. You look throughout time, and the greater a government gets and size and scope, the less freedoms people have and the less quality of life they have. And I think if we can really tie that and make that direct link, that it means more to people on their dining room table and their front doorstep by doing it a different way, I think it will be a transformational way to go.
And by the way, I'm not flip-flopping on this. I agree with what Brian just said. I also tend to believe there are going to be a certain amount of people, just because I've experienced this in my own life. There's going to be X amount. I don't think it's 50%. I do think that number could be a lot less. There is a portion that, they're going to be fine just taking a handout no matter what. But I think that's the very, very minority. I'm with Brian. I agree that if we can show people the advantages to getting out, earning a good living, have an opportunity, being an entrepreneur. We still live in one of I believe, the greatest country in the world where you can still go out and become the richest man in the world at, $80 billion like Bill Gates has done. He didn't start off with all of that money, Brian. He made that money as he went. And there's other, success stories, yourself included, that we can throw into that pot. And so we still have the land of opportunity. The question I have is, why don't we see more politicians running on that particular theme? In other words, hey, we have the land of opportunity. This is what we can do. I'm going to show you and teach you how to do this, and we're going to have a government that creates that opportunity. Why don't we see more candidates running on that?
Well, sadly, unfortunately, a lot of the candidates that are running are career politicians and have never gone out, had to sacrifice, and had to build things, themselves. But, I do agree with you as well. I'm grateful that we live in a country that has safety nets out there for our citizens. When they fall on tough times, there's a safety net to catch them and get them back on their feet. That being said, sadly, there are people that are always going to take advantage of different systems in life. And unfortunately, that safety net has become a hammock for some, and that was never what was intended. And I think we need to make sure that we streamline that process and, be there for people. At the same time, encourage people to get on their feet, to go be a productive member of society, whatever that looks like for them, and go from there. But it can't be, an ongoing way of life to the detriment of everybody else. Now, there are clearly people who will need ongoing assistance.
Correct.
And I respect that 100%. At the same time, we need to let the private sector come alongside and allow them to invest in those lives. If the government does everything, then you're robbing people of the blessing of being able to serve others in love. And I think we need to have more of that as well.
I agree. And I'm also one, and if you've listened to my show any length of time at all, everybody out there that's listened to me for a while knows this, I'm also one that believes that, a change of heart is what has to happen not only in our country, but we talk about the lives of individuals, and even some of those that have fallen on hard times. I'm not saying that, becoming a Christian, giving your life to Christ is going to take them from poverty and move them on, but it's a first step because it changes, or it should anyways, Brian, it should change the mindset of, I can do this myself with God's help, rather than I'm going to have the government take care of me. It should, becoming a Christian, should change your mindset and make a difference in how you even just look at day-to-day life and look at the world. Agree with that?
I agree with it 100%. And I also think it helps you to, align your priorities and what is really success in life. And I would submit that, success is loving your God and loving your neighbor as yourself and serving them in that love. And I think, not to be Pollyanna or anything about it, but I do believe it would be transformational if more people would, look at their own heart and figure out what they have to contribute, not what they have to get.
Yeah, and now we lead into a whole nother topic, which is, I believe wholeheartedly, that we have back to that mindset issue we talked to earlier. That mindset says government can be God. My mindset, on the other hand, and I think a lot of other right-minded, not even going liberty-minded, I'm just talking about the right-minded side of the fence, typically look at things a little differently and say, wait a minute, I don't need government to be my God because I already have that. So I just want my God to take care of me. I want that relationship. I'll go out and be self-sufficient, which is what we should be fostering. The problem is the left looks at themselves and government being the God, quote unquote, versus God Almighty being God.
Yeah. Well, and again, whatever one's belief system is at the end of the day, there is a fundamental structure that was put in place, by our founding fathers.
Yep.
And, it was one of the most amazing documents,
Yes.
When you look at the Declaration and the Constitution that have ever been put forth. And these people wrote, documents that were above and beyond themselves. Like you said before, they weren't perfect either.
No.
But they stretched themselves. And I believe that, having that framework of going out and serving others and to go achieve your dreams is one of the great things. And we need to make sure what we are putting in that God spot at the end of the day, because I think people will be left sorely disappointed if they try to put government there.
You're right, and you said it much more eloquently than I did. The problem we have is you can't, and we talked about this yesterday. I had Rick Green on yesterday, who's a great constitutionalist and has a program to teach young people about the Constitution and government and what the proper role of government is, et cetera, and what the Constitution actually means, and so on. A great program we had yesterday, but one of the things we talked about yesterday is, to your point, getting back to what our founding fathers wanted for us in the first place. And you just said it all. I mean, those guys were beyond their years is probably the best way to say that. That, they, and I'm one that believes they had God's hand upon them to be able to look down the road and create the documents that they did. There's no way possible they could have created what they created without God's help. That's just me. I believe that wholeheartedly, and I think people would have a hard time arguing with that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. And, I think you look at, documents like that, unfortunately, a lot of documents that are written by government or people in control of government are all about protecting themselves and about gaining more power for themselves.
That's right.
Our founding fathers wrote a document that gave power to the people. I mean, that is something that, just isn't commonplace.
Right.
That isn't natural human nature.
No, it's not.
And that's why, to me, it is a completely different level of a document.
No, and you said it all. Our framers looked at it totally non-humanistically, and you know what I mean by that. When you become a giver, which you've talked about some, and I'm a big giver. I believe in that. I believe that as you learn to give not only of yourself but of your money, your resources, et cetera, it changes your whole perspective on life, and it keeps things in check. I believe that's why God established the tithe way back when he did, because it changes your mindset when you realize that, wait a minute, all of this isn't mine in the first place, so you know what, it's a whole lot easier to give it away when you don't look at it as yours in the first place, and that whole giving spirit just changes everything. And by the way, we as a country, we talked about this yesterday, we're the most giving country that's ever been alive on the face of the planet.
We are. And, I think the joy and the blessing of giving is one of the great things of life. And, what's sad to me is, unfortunately, there are people in our government, specifically the federal government, that are castigating us as saying that, we're a bad people or that we're not a giving people and that government needs to do this. You know what? There has never been a country like the United States of America, period, on the world scene. And I tell people often, just for a moment, take the United States off of the world scene as if it never existed. And what kind of world do you have? And I would submit that you have a world that's pretty dark, that's warring, that's not giving as much, and has not had the transformational impact that the United States has had. Now, are we perfect? No. But I will tell you, our people have done a lot of great things in the world and done a lot of good.
That's exactly right. We fortunately, even to this day, continue to foster that. We're overseas, fighting wars that, by all means, we wouldn't have to. I mean, we could literally put our own forces on our own soil and say, all right, folks, we're going to build a big wall. We're going to make sure that we're going to defend ourselves. We're not going to go to other countries to do that defense. We're just going to make sure that we're very, defense-oriented here, and we're going to make sure things are great. You know what? Whatever happens around the rest of the world happens. We don't really care. That's not the attitude that we take, fortunately. Part of that is for our national defense. But in a lot of cases, Brian, it's just simply because we're there as a humanitarian aid to make sure that country, you look at Ebola right now. We're doing things in other countries that, we don't have to do that, but we are because we're a giving people, and it goes against the grain of some on the left that don't think that.
Yeah, and one of the few mandates, by our Constitution for our federal government is to protect our citizens. And so, but you look at how much blood we have spilled in overseas soil. It's heartbreaking. But at the end of the day, we need to go out and engage the world as well and do our part as it relates to it because of the responsibility that we've been given.
You're right. All right, when I come back in one more segment, and that's all I've got time for today, Brian. But if you would, when we come back, I do want to talk about education. I know that's something that's close to your heart. It's close to mine. I want to talk about that. I think there's things that you've got in mind that actually make education a lot better for not only our country but just society in general. So we'll talk about it when we come back. Hang with us. We'll be back with Brian Watson, head of Northstar Commercial Partners, and many other things that he does. Great man. You can hear that in just his tone, the conversations we've had today. We're going to talk about education, and I am going to pinpoint him and say, all right, who do we need to vote for to get our business and our economy back on track? We'll talk about that as soon as we come back next. Don't go away. John Rush, your host, Rush to Reason, KLZ 560. All right, last segment of this hour of Rush to Reason. John Rush, your host. Again, I've had Brian Watson with me. Brian, again, thanks so much for your time today. I do appreciate it very much. Let's finish out this hour talking about education, and then I do want to put you on the spot and talk about who we need to vote for. But, education, that's a big deal. Not only does it impact society, it impacts you and I when it comes to hiring, good quality people. What do we do to fix this education issue that we have going on now? And it seems to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that we're getting, further down the negative side than we are the positive side.
Yeah. Well, let me first start off by saying that I'm a public school kid, and I grew up on the western slope of Colorado in the little town of Olathe, and we had one school to choose from, and that's what we had. But, for me, education literally is one of our civil rights issues of our day. The wealthy in our country already have choice in education. They can move to the school district that they want to because they can afford to do so, or they can send their kids to private school. Everybody else is caught in the current system. And I believe that you have to empower parents and students with choice in education. And by having choice and having competition, we'll have a better overall product for our people to choose from.
I couldn't agree more. And you do that through lots of ways. We can do that through public, through charter schools on the public school side of the fence. You can do it through, future private schools or even existing private schools. I've talked before once on this program about vouchers. Vouchers would be a very easy way to create competition. But really, Brian, when it's all said and done, the biggest thing that we'd have to battle is we've got the unions to fight.
We do, and we're trying to do our part at Northstar. A number of years ago, I decided to start connecting my passions with my profession, and my passion is creating jobs and opportunity for people. And now with this new education fund, we're going out to buy, vacant office, industrial, and retail buildings. We usually buy those at sub 40% of their replacement cost, and we're buying on behalf of charter schools. I'm working with 10 charter schools right now where we're buying these buildings in certain areas where a lot of new schools or programs can't be had. And so we're going into these communities and we're buying the buildings and we're improving them. And these charter schools will be our tenants, and they can buy the building when they want to. And through that choice, you're also helping with the issue of the unions, and you're also helping the issue with empowering parents and students of going into the environment where they're most going to thrive.
Is there ever a point in time to where we can have too many charter schools?
Well, right now in the state we have about 200 charter schools. That's about 11% of the overall population. There's a thought in most things in life that if you can get to that 20% or larger, then you have a tipping point, and where true choice is being created. And that's what we want to come alongside and help, and whether it be in the metro area or all through our state. People often forget, though, that charter schools are public schools. They're a form of public schools. And at the end of the day, I think that all teachers will benefit by having this competition. It's just that, they're concerned about it, and I respect where they're coming from. At the same time, those schools and those buildings, they're there for the kids. Right. And we need to make sure that we're focusing the money in the classroom and having a positive impact there.
Yeah. I respect them, but I also disagree with some of their stands and how we do things. And, of course, some of them are so ingrained in the union and to their, how do I want to say this? To the union's credit, I should say, they've done a very good job of getting people on their side, teachers and parents alike. Unfortunately, they're they may be right in their eyes, but they're not right when it comes to, how we need to do things and make things move forward. We're not going to get to where we need to be as a country having the stuff that's going on in Jeffco right now happening. But that's, again, that's another discussion for another day. So let's talk about these last few minutes of the show. Who to vote for? We've got a big, election coming up. We've got lots of races. Some of them are very tight. We've been talking about on KLZ here. In fact, we're going to do some public announcements about it here in the very near future. Undervoting, not voting for a particular candidate like we talked about early in the show, Brian, to prove a point. What is your thoughts on all of that? Who should we be voting for, and how do we counter some of those folks that think it's okay to undervote?
You bet. Well, I would say absolutely off the top, voting for a Cory Gardner. Colorado will be the pivotal state, is the pivotal state of whether we will control the U.S. Senate or not. And somebody with the quality and caliber of a Cory Gardner there, with his energy, absolutely would encourage people to vote for him. Bob Beaupre, he's trying to pull off something that a lot of people don't realize. In 52 years, and I said 52 years, an incumbent hasn't knocked off, a challenger hasn't knocked off an incumbent for governor in Colorado.
Wow.
So Bob is trying to do something that isn't easily done. Bob's a quality guy. I think he also is doing it for the right reason. And again, going back to that idea of who do you want to employ to work for you. And here's the deal. You're paying Cory, you're paying Bob, you're paying a Walker Stapleton. You're paying them all the same, whether you vote for them or the other guy and or woman. And I really believe that the candidates that we have in Cory Gardner, Bob Beaupre, Walker Stapleton for treasurer are a great way. The other thing I would say is look at your your state Senate race. Right now, the Democrats have carte blanche control, and we've seen what that looks like in our state.
Yep.
I would submit they're too extreme for Colorado, not our side being too extreme. You think about the gun legislation and all the taxation, they're way too extreme for our state, and we need to have some stopgaps and trying to push them back. So I think controlling one of the chambers, being especially the Senate, which is within our grasp, I would encourage people to give of their time, their talent, and their treasure over the next 21 days, because Election Day is coming up, and we need to make some strides here in the state.
Oh, man, you couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, I've got to do some PSAs along those lines. I'm going to take some of your words you just used. In fact, it's a reminder of what you just said, that, you know what, they're all on the payroll. Which one would you rather be paying, Mark Udall or Cory Gardner? And when you put it that way, Brian, that makes it a pretty easy decision, because you know what, I don't want Udall on my payroll.
Yeah. Well, and also think to yourself, when's the last time you saw Udall in your community rolling up his shirt sleeves or going to a nonprofit event or reaching out? These people, they love to go to the big Democratic parties that come into town. Now they're all distancing themselves from Obama. But at the end of the day, these are not people who have really been engaged in our community, have been working hard. Cory, he comes from a small town, and his father's selling tractors. I love that ad. What has Mark Udall's family done? And a totally different mindset.
That's right. That's right. No, man, you home run. I couldn't have said it better myself. In fact, we may take some of that and clip that out and actually use that for some PSAs. If you don't mind, Brian, we'll use some of that and plug that into some things that we need to get going, because we have got to get people out next week. We've got to make sure that they're, not next week, but this entire next 3 weeks, make sure that they're voting in Colorado. It's all done by, mail-in ballots now, so we got to make sure that we're voting. And by the way, folks, and Brian knows what I'm saying here, do not vote early and do not mail that ballot in. Please vote, a day or two beforehand, and drop that ballot into a locked box wherever your local precinct is, where that drop-off location is at. Do not vote early. But Brian, man, thanks so much. I'd love to have you back on. Maybe after the elections are over, we can recap some things. I'd love to do that, get your perspective at that point, and see what we need to do to keep this country moving forward.
Well, I want to acknowledge what you're doing. I really appreciate you getting the truth out there. If anybody wants to learn about our initiatives, they can go to brianwatson.us. And please keep the airwaves going. I appreciate everything that you're doing.
We'll do it, Brian. Thanks again so much. I appreciate it. Great guest we just had with Brian Watson. Fantastic. And, I've never really heard – I'm going to steal his words when I do my own PSA for some of this stuff coming up. Who do you want on the payroll? Guys, that's what it really boils down to. Mark Zarlingo, I know you listen to me a lot. Who do you want on the payroll? Who do you want to be writing the check to, Gardner or Udall?